Hi, I'm Bob Trask, and this is our weekly reset. Thank you for being with me. Today, we're going to talk about something pretty doggone special, everlasting life. I don't know if you've considered that you might die and end existing forever and ever and ever. I mean, that's what most people think, or maybe many people think. But we learn that when we're little children, and it guides our lives, that fear of death. The fear of dying, of ceasing to be, of knowing this whole life and all the nifty things that are in it and the fun things that are in it and the great hopes and desires for a better and better future. All of that's going on inside of us, and we don't want that to end. We don't want to just die and have that all just evaporate, do we? So we dread death. But how do we get to that place where we dread death? Ran D. Anbar, MD, and psychiatrist, said, children often bring up the subject of death in my counseling practice. Some children in their middle elementary school years report a fear of dying and sometimes express worry about falling asleep because they or their family members might die overnight. More frequently, teenagers bring up the topic of death in the context of coming to grips with having a finite life and asking about its meaning. Many of my patients who bring up the topic of death deal with anxiety, but some deal with the loss or impending loss of a loved one, including a pet. Some patients have serious or terminal medical illnesses that bring death closer to home. Studies have shown that children develop views on death based on how it's presented to them. If death is presented as resulting from a cessation of biological function, then young children are more apt to think death in biological terms than when death is explained in an afterlife context. You know, my friend Paula Forget, that's spelled forget, Forget, just released an excellent book called What If You Lived 300 Years? In her book, she suggests that if we could imagine ourselves living for 300 years, we'd relax. We'd stop worrying about each little wrinkle in the blanket of life. Paula's book is one very worth reading. But how long can we live physically? How long? How long can we hang around in these bodies? The United Nations estimates that there were about 95,000 centenarians in 1990, 95,000 in 1990, people over 100. 25 years later, that number had more than quadrupled, had grown to 450,000. The UN estimates that by 2100, there will be 25 million people in their hundreds. And already people who live beyond 110 is becoming more and more common in wealthy nations. Jean Calment was a 13-year-old girl in Arles, France, when Van Gogh lived there and painted there. She continued into living in Arles after Van Gogh died. In fact, she lived to an age of 122 years. In substantiated history, she's the oldest person that ever lived, 122 years. So we might live to be 120, and sometimes scientists are saying that it's not beyond our reach to live even to 150 or maybe even more. Some scientists are predicting that by a future date like the year 2040, you might be able to decide how long you want to live. You might want to live maybe forever because they can do things with genes and things with cells that would enable you to stop the aging process. But whether that happens or not, For the vast majority of us, life on this planet is limited. We're going to go into the great beyond. Then the question becomes this: when our bodies die, do we somehow continue living? Let's take a look at that. There's so much solid information about the continuation of life that one would have to be pretty close-minded not to consider it, not to see it. When I guess I was 26 or 27, my mom died suddenly of a heart attack. She was 46 years old. And she had been my best friend and my buddy and the one person that I could count on in the world. And her loss was really crushing to me. But I went on. My life changed. I left my job in the Forest Service and moved to San Diego and just got a room in a rooming house that was run by a Catholic priest that had been our priest when I was a boy. And and Father Davis ran this rooming house, and I lived in a room upstairs. And about a year after Mama died, one night there was a knock on the door. And I said, yeah, I sat up in my bed, turned on the light, and I said, come in. And my mom came in. My mom. Now, you might think, well, he was dreaming, or he was hallucinating, or he was fantasizing. Well, stick with my story and we'll see. So she came and sat on the bed next to me, and we talked. And I asked her, what's it like over there, wherever you are? And she said, son, I can't tell you. Not that, not that I can't try, but there are no words in this language that equate what's going on that side. Now, those aren't her words, those are mine, but that's what she said to me. You can't describe it. You just can't describe it. We talked for a little bit, and then she said, I came to ask you a question because I know you'll tell me the truth. And I said, okay. Now, my stepfather, who lived with us and who was the man of the family, was an alcoholic and a rageaholic. He was suffering from really severe post-traumatic stress disorder from the Second World War. And he was drinking as self-medication. And my mom pretty much isolated him. She wasn't mean to him. She didn't try to help him pull out of that. And I never thought about it. That was just the way life was. Now mom's sitting on my bed. She said, I have to ask you, and you need to be honest with me. Was I fair to Dan? And for the first time in my life, I realized, the question awakened within me, the realization that she could have maybe helped him, maybe nurtured him, maybe helped pull him out of this incredible depression and terror. She said, Bob, you have to tell me the truth. So I said, Mom, no, you weren't really fair to Dan. And she said, okay, thank you. That's what I had to come and find out. Thank you. Now she said, I've got to go. I said, Mom, don't leave. Don't go. Don't go yet. She said, I need to go because I'm going to go take Peggy and we're going to go shopping. Peggy's my older sister. Well, it's pretty common for a mom to say, your sister and I are going shopping. That wasn't an out of the world thing for me to hear. But the truth of it is that my sister lived outside of San Diego, out in the outer county, and I hadn't spoken to her, nor had she spoken to me for over a year since Mama died. So I said, well, okay. So she left. She got up, went out the door, closed the door, and left. And I was sitting there on my bed in absolute wonder I couldn't go back to sleep. I got up, I put on my running shorts and my shoes and a t-shirt, and I went down to the beach and I ran in the darkness. I ran and I ran and I'd stop and sit for a while and then I'd run some more. And the sun came up, I continued running. And then I took off my shoes and I jumped in the water and I swam and I swam and I came back and sat on the beach and tried to wrap my head around what just had happened. It was unbelievable. It was life-changing. And I went back to my room finally toward evening and took a shower and changed clothes and was going to go downstairs to a little cafe in town and get something to eat. And as I was going down the stairs, another sister of mine, Marilyn, was coming up the steps. And she said, "Sit down, I want to talk to you." So we sat down on the steps and I said, "What are you doing here?" It was unusual for her to come out to that center. I said, "What are you doing here?" She said, "Well, I had to bring your sister Peggy in to see Father Davis." And I said, "Why?" She said, "She's all upset because she said your mother came and took her shopping last night." So there it is. Now, there's no question that it really happened because it happened to Peggy. And it happened to me. And I asked Peggy later, I said, "How could she have taken you shopping?" She said, "We went to an all-night market and we just walked around and shopped and I bought some things." I I was astounded. But science has proven that the material universe is actually made up not of matter, but of energy. And that energy is guided by an overall intelligence. Heinz Pagels, as executive director of the New York Academy of Sciences, said the visible world is the invisible organization of energy. To our senses, all matter appears to be stable. In fact, the fact is, however, that we are perceiving only about 1% of what's out there. Our eyes detect only visible light. Our ears only pick up a small fraction of all sound and frequencies. Our senses of smell and taste and touch are equally limited. The physical properties of this universe need massive amounts of energy in order to be masses. Most of that energy scientists cannot understand. They say they can't detect it. They say they're only detecting about 5% of that total energy. Where's the rest of it? Intelligent energy. Is it a great being of which we are a part? What would we experience if we realized that our bodies are only energy, only light? One thing, we'd see that we're a light show, that our bodies are made up almost entirely of space. It was Einstein who successfully showed that matter wasn't stable when he mathematically proved that energy equals matter and that the two are interchangeable. Max Planck, physicist and Nobel laureate, and a man that I have such respect for, said, "I regard consciousness as the fundamental. I regard matter as derivative of consciousness. Everything that we talk about, everything that we regard as existing is consciousness." Sri Yukteswar, astrologist, scholar, author, and astronomer, said, "The astral universe is made of subtle vibrations of light and color hundreds of times larger than the material cosmos." And many thousands of people have experienced this through near-death experiences, where they're no longer physical beings, they were beings of pure intelligent energy. History books are filled with their stories of transcendental experiences, all with the common thread of the interplay of light and energy. Scientist Nikola Tesla, founder of alternating current, said, "If you want to find the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration." And meditation masters regularly achieve superhuman mental states and travel into pure energy forms, and they do that frequently. The realms they say that they're going into are right here, right now. Listen, we're talking about near-death experiences. Scientist and biophysicist Joyce Hawks had such an experience when she was briefly physically dead. She said that before the NDA, before the near-death experience, she was at the peak of her field as a biophysicist. She said, I was at the very top peak of my field as a biophysicist, scientist. For me, science was the whole deal. I had no belief in an afterlife. And yet there greeting me at the entrance to the light was my grandmother and my mother. Then I went into a place that was exquisitely beautiful with rolling hills and lights, and then into the presence of a being of light. Dr. Hans Peter Durr, when head of the Max Planck Institute for Physics, said, our lives on this plane of existence are encompassed and surrounded by the afterworld already. The body dies, but the spiritual quantum field continues. In this way, I am immortal. Moorjani was diagnosed as with lymphoma in 2002, and she was losing her cancer battle, withering down to just 85 pounds and battling tumors from the base of her skull to her abdomen. And she slipped into a coma in February of 2006. She said that's when she died and crossed over into the afterlife. I felt like I was above my body, she said, like I had a 360-degree peripheral vision of the whole area around, but not just the room where my body was, but beyond the room. Then I was with my father, and he told me I must turn back. He said that I've gone as far as I can, and that if I go any farther, I won't be able to turn back. But I felt I didn't want to turn back because it was so beautiful. It was just incredible. Because for the first time, all the pain had gone. All the discomfort had gone. All the fear was gone. I felt so incredible. And I felt as though I was enveloped in this clarity and in this unconditional love, where everything started to make sense. She said she decided to return to her body because she believed it would heal very, very quickly. And it did. Within 4 days, her tumors had shrunk by 70%, and her doctors were shocked. She said, I kept telling everyone that I know I'm going to be okay. It's just not my time to die. Her experiences guide us, teach us. I mean, there are thousands of stories like that. And they are all the same story. They all talk about the light, capital L light. They all talk about unconditional love. Kayla, who's been in that place, talks about the colors that are not the colors of the spectrum. They're beyond that. They're in another world. And as we just heard, you can't see beyond this, just a very limited spectrum. You can't hear except just beyond a limited spectrum. You can't taste and touch and smell and feel beyond a very limited spectrum. When we go into the light, there are no more limits. And as Morjani said, everything begins to make sense. Everything starts making sense. Her experience is one of truth, the truth of who we are as eternal beings. Our consciousness exists separate from material substance. So the death of your physical body is not the end of your conscious existence. And it is the consciousness then of history's greatest sages and seers that we are in an eternal experience. As pure consciousness, we were never born and we can never die. Now, I hope that this information goes past your intellect and gets into the deepest part of you, your consciousness, and that you get an assuredness from this talk that you're permanent. A dear friend of mine passed away a year and a half ago. He had pulmonary fibrosis, a thickening of his lungs, and it came on pretty fast. He didn't know it was there, and he was a trumpet player, so it wasn't like he didn't have good lungs, and he hadn't been a smoker, but somehow it came on him, and he was desperate. And it was during the pandemic. He was in Canada, and I couldn't get up to Canada to hold him and love him and see him and be with him. So I had to talk to him on the phone, and and he was terrified. And I asked him, are you terrified of dying? He said, oh, I'm not afraid of dying. I'm afraid of the punishment I'm going to get on the other side. And I said, punishment for what? And Lee was not a bad man or an evil man. He was not a guy who had a big burden of karmic debt that he was carrying around. He might have been upset and he might have been a little sharp with someone once in a while, but he was a beautiful, beautiful, humble, generous, kind man. But he was terrified. He had been taught back when he was a child about heaven and hell. And he had not gone to church regularly. So he had not, in his child mind, followed the Christian line. So he was then susceptible to going to hell, to burning forever and ever in hell. And he went into that terror, into that panic. And he carried it right up until the moment he died. And I couldn't. I mean, I said to him, am I your minister? And he said, yes. I said, I'm your minister. Then I'm your spiritual guide. He said, yes. Then I want to tell you right now, you are forgiven. You are forgiven. He said that helped, but I know it didn't end the fear. So what I'm asking you to do is look at this situation in your life. Don't let fear of death be guiding you any further in your life, because you're not going to die. And I know that there's a physical part of your brain that has been trained already to think you're going to die, and that it's hard to get past that. But that's just a belief system. It's a subconscious belief system. And I can tell you, I've been on that other side, and it is beautiful. It is so spectacular. And it's permanent. It's forever. So just know, as pure conscious energy, we were never born and we can never die. I love you. Thank you for being with me. If this talk has been meaningful to you, or if you want to support all my other work in the world, will you please go to my website, bobtrask.com, and leave a donation, any amount that'll help me stay with my work and bringing this kind of message, a common sense spirituality to the world, and continue these weekly resets. Thank you. Now, if you must go, then I understand, and I send you away with my blessings, and I'll see you next week. But if you can stick around for a while, we're going to have a conversation about the very things that we've been talking about.